In a historic and closely watched decision, the Supreme Court has sharply limited the president's power, marking a significant moment in the ongoing debate over the balance of authority in the U.S. government. The ruling specifically restricts the president's ability to impose tariffs on imported goods without first obtaining congressional approval, a move that directly impacts how the United States manages its trade relationships and economic policies. The court ruled against former President Trump's use of emergency powers to enact sweeping tariffs, declaring that such significant economic actions require explicit consent from Congress. This decision comes after years of debate over the scope of executive authority, especially in times of perceived crisis. This verdict restores a crucial check on executive authority, signaling that even in urgent or extraordinary circumstances, the president cannot bypass the legislative branch when it comes to major economic policy decisions. The ruling reinforces the foundational principle that Congress, as the people's representative, must have a direct say in shaping the nation's trade and economic future. The decision brings new predictability to global markets, reassuring allies, investors, and businesses that U.S. trade policy will now require open congressional debate and approval. This added transparency is expected to reduce uncertainty and foster stronger international partnerships. Legal scholars see this as a turning point, reasserting the separation of powers and curbing the trend of expanding presidential authority. Many experts believe this ruling will serve as a precedent for future cases involving executive overreach, strengthening the constitutional framework. For Americans, from farmers to consumers and small business owners, the ruling promises more stability and less volatility in trade policy. With Congress more involved, sudden changes in tariffs or trade agreements are less likely, helping families and businesses plan for the future. The consequences of this judgment will shape U.S. politics, law, and the economy for years to come, influencing how future presidents govern and how the nation responds to global economic challenges. This landmark decision is a reminder of the enduring importance of checks and balances in American democracy. The story of the modern tariff saga began with the Trump administration's Bold America First policy, a strategy that aimed to prioritize American interests in every aspect of government, especially in trade. This marked a significant shift from previous administrations, which had generally favored free trade and multilateral agreements. The administration openly challenged existing trade agreements, arguing that they put American workers and industries at a disadvantage. China, as the world's second-largest economy and a major U.S. trading partner, quickly became the primary target of these new policies. Negotiations between the two countries grew tense, with both sides digging in over issues like intellectual property, technology transfer, and market access. In a dramatic move, President Trump declared a national emergency, invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. This law was originally designed to address threats from hostile foreign powers, not to be used as a tool in economic disputes with trading partners. Nevertheless, the administration argued that unfair trade practices posed a serious threat to national security. Beginning in 2018, the U.S. imposed sweeping tariffs on steel, aluminum, and a vast array of Chinese goods. These actions ignited a global trade war, with China and other countries retaliating with their own tariffs on American products. The ripple effects were felt worldwide, impacting supply chains, prices, and international relations. The Trump administration insisted these measures were necessary to protect American industries and force China to change its trade practices. However, critics argued that the president was overstepping constitutional limits, using emergency powers in ways Congress never intended. Many worried about the long-term consequences for American businesses and consumers. Lawsuits soon followed as businesses and importers challenged the administration's authority. They claimed that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was never meant to serve as a blank check for launching trade wars, and that such sweeping actions should require congressional approval. The legal battle over these tariffs escalated, eventually reaching the Supreme Court. The justices were asked to decide whether the president had the power to unilaterally reshape U.S. trade policy using emergency powers. Today's Supreme Court decision brings closure to this contentious chapter, signaling an end to aggressive unilateral trade actions by the executive branch. With this ruling, the authority to shape U.S. trade policy now returns firmly to Congress, restoring the balance of power and setting a new precedent for how America will handle trade disputes in the future. At the heart of the case is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, passed in 1977. IEEPA lets the president regulate economic transactions after declaring a national emergency, but was designed for foreign policy crises, not domestic economic overhaul. The Trump administration claimed IEEPA's broad language justified tariffs as a response to economic threats. Opponents argued the law never explicitly gave the president power to set tariffs, a role reserved for Congress. The Supreme Court agreed, clarifying that IEEPA cannot be used to create new tariff regimes and reaffirming Congress's authority over trade. This ruling draws a clear line on the limits of presidential emergency powers. Central to the court's decision is the Major Questions Doctrine, which requires clear congressional authorization for actions with vast economic and political impact. Challengers argued that imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions in goods is a major policy shift, demanding explicit approval from Congress. The Supreme Court agreed, ruling that vague emergency powers cannot justify such sweeping actions. The justices emphasized that the power to tax and regulate foreign commerce is a core congressional responsibility. This application of the Major Questions Doctrine sets a new standard for executive action, especially in economic matters. Future presidents must now seek direct legislative backing for dramatic policy changes. The ruling signals a more assertive judiciary in policing the boundaries between branches. It's a landmark moment for the separation of powers. The Trump administration defended the tariffs as a necessary tool for swift action against foreign threats, arguing that the president needs broad authority in emergencies. They claimed that IEEPA's language was intentionally flexible, allowing the president to regulate foreign commerce as needed. The administration warned that limiting executive power would leave the U.S. vulnerable in a fast-changing world. They insisted that courts should defer to the president's judgment in national emergencies. Ultimately, the Supreme Court rejected this plea for expansive executive power in trade policy. The decision marks a clear boundary. Emergency powers are not a license for unilateral economic action. The era of unchecked presidential trade authority is over. The challengers built their case on the Constitution's separation of powers, arguing that only Congress can impose taxes and regulate international trade. They showed that IEEPA was never meant to grant the president broad tariff authority, contrasting it with other laws where Congress was explicit. The opposition highlighted the real-world harm disrupted supply chains, higher costs, and retaliatory tariffs hurting American farmers and exporters. They argued that such sweeping policies should only follow public debate and a congressional vote. A lead attorney summed it up. This case is about whether we are governed by laws or by executive whims. The Supreme Court's ruling is a victory for constitutional order and economic stability. It reaffirms Congress's central role in shaping trade policy. The decision restores the balance intended by the nation's founders. The legal fight began in the U.S. Court of International Trade, where challengers first won a major victory. This court, which specializes in cases involving international trade and customs laws, became the initial battleground for a dispute that would soon capture national attention. Lawyers for the challengers argued that the president had overstepped his authority, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation as the case unfolded. The court ruled that IEEPA was not meant for broad trade policy, and the decision was upheld by the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. The judges emphasized that the law's original intent was to address emergencies, not to serve as a tool for sweeping economic measures. This interpretation set the stage for a broader legal debate about the limits of executive power. The appellate court relied on the Major Questions Doctrine, finding no explicit congressional authorization for the tariffs. This doctrine holds that when an issue of vast economic or political significance is at stake, clear authorization from Congress is required. The judges pored over legal texts and precedents, ultimately concluding that the president's actions lacked the necessary legislative backing. A minority of judges dissented, arguing for deference to presidential emergency powers, but the majority prevailed. The dissenters warned that limiting executive authority could hamper the government's ability to respond swiftly to crises, but their arguments did not sway the majority. The Supreme Court took up the case due to its national significance. Legal experts and the public alike watched closely, recognizing that the outcome could reshape the balance of power between Congress and the president. After hearing arguments from both sides, the court delivered a 6-3 decision affirming the lower courts. The majority opinion reinforced the principle that the president cannot act without clear congressional approval in matters of major national importance. The ruling ends years of legal uncertainty and sets a definitive limit on presidential power under IEEPA. For many, the decision brought a sense of closure and relief, while others saw it as a call for further debate on executive authority. The case is now a landmark in the ongoing debate over executive authority. Legal scholars continue to analyze its implications, and it is frequently cited in discussions about the separation of powers. The judicial journey underscores the importance of checks and balances in American government. It serves as a powerful reminder that no branch of government is above the law, and that the courts play a crucial role in upholding the Constitution. The Supreme Court's decision will reshape the American economy and political landscape. For businesses, it brings relief and stability, allowing for better planning and potentially lower costs for consumers. Some domestic industries like steel and aluminum may now face tougher competition from imports. Politically, the ruling is a rebuke of unilateral trade strategies and a win for free trade advocates. Congress is likely to reclaim more control over trade policy, possibly leading to new legislation. The decision sparks a national conversation about the limits of executive power and the costs of protectionism. Internationally, it reassures allies and signals the resilience of American institutions. The verdict may help repair strained relationships and encourage a return to multilateral trade talks. In the long run, the ruling promises a more stable, rules-based approach to global commerce. The Supreme Court's decision is more than a resolution of a tariff dispute. It's a powerful reaffirmation of the separation of powers. By ruling that the president cannot unilaterally impose tariffs under IEEPA, the court recalibrates the balance between executive and legislative branches. The verdict strengthens Congress's hand and sets a binding precedent for future trade policy. It affirms that major economic decisions require explicit legislative approval, even in times of crisis. The ruling will be studied and debated for years, shaping the nature of presidential leadership. As the nation absorbs this historic moment, the message is clear. American democracy is strongest when power is balanced and accountable. The Supreme Court has drawn a firm line, ensuring the enduring wisdom of the Constitution prevails.